Hello students, welcome to lesson 10 on year 3 of science in the family school online. In today's lesson we are going to talk about metabolic pathways, okay? And this lesson is a break from the lesson 9 because we couldn't cover all the material there in lesson 9. So I decided to create this lesson specifically for analyzing and learning about these metabolic pathways. In this video today, I'm going to kind of model or show you how I would use the lesson to study the materials for the lesson, how I would prepare with the things that I would do if I were a student using the lesson in order to prepare for it. So let's see how this would work. If I were a student, I would come here to the lesson and start reading and seeing, all right, let's see what this is about. Metabolic pathways, run and not be weary, walk and not faint. That sounds like the word of wisdom to me. So I would go and look at the academic concepts, read them carefully and see, all right, these are the things that we are going to talk about. And yes, in the gospel principles, we are going to talk, it seems, about the word of wisdom. That is very exciting, really good. Then I see in the vocabulary section some new words. Okay, metabolism is the set of life-sustaining chemical transformations within the cell of living organisms. Okay. So it seems that it means to change. I would probably go into Wikipedia and look for the article on metabolism, okay? And I would scan it and see, all right, all right, so that is where the definition comes from. These enzyme catalyzed reactions allow organisms to grow and reproduce, maintain their structure, and respond to the environment. Chemical reactions that occur in living organisms, including digestion and the transport of substance. So that could also be metabolism. Okay, I see here the picture of ATP. I recognize that from previous lessons. All right. And this seems very interesting. So key biochemicals. Most of the structures that make up animals, plants, and microbes are made from 3 basic classes of molecules: amino acids, carbohydrates, and lipids, often called fats. Oh, I remember we did the lesson on this, on the building blocks. Okay. Let's see. As these molecules are vital for life, metabolic reactions either focus on making these molecules during the construction of cells and tissues, or by breaking them down and using them as a source of energy by their digestion. Okay, so we have that sometimes the metabolic reactions are focused on making the molecules. Other times are focused on breaking down the molecules. Okay. These biochemicals can be joined together to make polymers, such as DNA and proteins, essential macromolecules of life. Okay, we talk about DNA, we talk about proteins, polymers. I could follow the article, the link here on polymers to see what is a polymer. I know from other things that a polymer is kind of the repeated sequence of a chemical. Okay, so here we have the type of molecules: amino acids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids. We talk about those. All right, and we also in our table we also put lipids here. Okay, so the monomer, so basically the basic unit of that, of the amino acid, is the amino acid. Monosaccharides, such as glucose. Nucleotides, the adenine, A, T, C, G, okay, those are the nucleotides. And then the polymer, the amino acids form proteins, the monosaccharides form polysaccharides, nucleotides, polynucleotides, And then the examples that we have of each, we have the proteins, can be fibrous proteins like muscle proteins. Globular proteins are the proteins that form these machines, like the ATP synthesis, okay? That is one example of a globular protein. I could follow more of these links to look into that. Polysaccharides, starch, glycogen, and cellulose. I remember that we talk about plants, how they form starch and cellulose, but I don't know much about glycogen. We talk about glucose, okay, but not glycogen. So we can look into that also. And DNA and RNA, the example of things that, okay, so from here I take that metabolism is the building up of these different types of polymers and molecules using the different building blocks, okay? Oh, and here they explain further how each one of those are used. They include lipids here, we hadn't seen before. And I could read more about coenzymes also, what they are. So for now, that is good. So now I know about metabolism, okay? Then we see catabolism and anabolism. So catabolism, the breaking down of organic matter, such as cellular respiration, and usually releases energy. Anabolism, the building up of components of cells, such as proteins and nucleic acids, usually consumes energy. Okay, so if I look at the Wikipedia articles for that, catabolism, from the Greek kato, downward, and balin, to throw, so basically to throw down, to break down, catabolism. So it's the set of metabolic pathways that break down molecules into smaller units that are either oxidized to release energy or used in other anabolic reactions. Okay, so catabolism breaks down large molecules such as polysaccharides, lipid, nucleic acids, and proteins into smaller units such as monosaccharides, fatty acids, nucleotides, and amino acids, respectively. So we see that the big molecules are broken down into the smaller ones. Okay, good. All right, let's see anabolism. Anabolism, ana, upward, balin, to throw. So now it's basically to throw up, all right? Is the set of metabolic pathways that construct molecules from smaller units. So this is not throwing up. This is about building up, okay? These reactions require energy. Yeah, whenever you have to build something up, it's going to require energy. One way of categorizing metabolic processes, either at the cellular, organ, or organism level is as anabolic or as catabolic, which is the opposite. Yeah, we already saw that. Anabolism is powered by catabolism. So before I can build something up, I have to break it down. Let's see, where large molecules are broken down into smaller parts and then used up in respiration. Okay. Many anabolic processes are powered by the hydrolysis of adenosine triphosphate, ATP. We studied that. Okay, so what this means is that the anabolic processes need ATP in order to happen. Okay, so okay, I got it. So now I know about metabolism, catabolism, and anabolism. All right. So in metabolism, we saw this glycogen, okay? And I remember that I was curious about that because we talk about glucose, but not glycogen. Let's see, glycogen is a multi-branch polysaccharide of glucose. Okay, so glycogen is made, is multi-branch, many branches of glucose that serves as a form of energy storage in animals and fungi. So this type of organisms have glycogen. The polysaccharide structure represents the main storage form of glucose in the body. Okay, in humans, glycogen is made and stored primarily in the cells in the liver and the muscles, hydrated with 3 or 4 parts of water. Alright, so glycogen is made out of tons of glucose molecules. Oh my goodness! So this is kind of a representation of glycogen. It seems that here in the middle it has like a protein that makes the branches, and each one of those subunits is a molecule of glucose. Let's see, schematic two-dimensional cross-sectional view of glycogen. A core protein of glycogenin, okay, that's the protein here in the middle, is surrounded by branches of glucose units. The entire globular granule may contain around 30,000 glucose units. Okay, so that's where the glucose is stored. So it's put together into these large granules of glycogen. Okay. So then I imagine that after this glycogen is put together into the cell tissue, okay, into the muscle tissue, then it can be broken down into individual molecules of glucose to be used in respiration. All right. So, okay, so I could read more about this. I would love to spend more time on this. All right. We'll continue and see. Fatty acid. So a fatty acid, a chain of carbon atoms usually join to other fatty acids there's a typo there, in the case of triglycerides or phospholipids. I remember talking about phospholipids in the phospholipid bilayer. The triglycerides, I think that I remember that those were when there were 3 fatty acids joined together. When not attached, they are free fatty acids and are an important source of fuel because they yield large quantities of ATP. Okay, so somehow these fatty acids, let's look them up also in Wikipedia. These fatty acids can be used for energy. Fatty acids is a carboxylic acid with a long, I don't know, saturated or unsaturated. I've heard of that, about saturated fats and unsaturated fats. Most naturally occurring fatty acids have a chain of an even number of carbon atoms, from 12 to 28. Okay, fatty acids are usually derived from triglycerides and phospholipids, or phospholipids. When they are not attached to other molecules, they are known as free fatty acids. Fatty acids are an important source of fuels because when metabolized, they yield large quantities of ATP. Many cell types can use either glucose or fatty acids for this purpose. Okay, so we studied that glucose is used in cellular respiration. Okay, but it seems that now we are going to see how fatty acids are also used to produce ATP. Okay, in particular, heart and skeletal muscle prefer fatty acids. All right. Okay. Despite long-standing assertions to the contrary, fatty acids can be used as a source of fuel for the brain. Okay, at least in some rodents, so this is still under study. All right, so here we have some examples of fatty acids. So here is what they look like. Okay, so they are the chains here of carbon. The black is carbon. The kind of grayish are hydrogen atoms. And then the red ones, we always remember those are oxygen. So sometimes they are bent. I wonder why they are bent. Okay, and some of them are straight. All right. So we could see a little more and see. So if I were to read more on this, I find out that the bent ones, okay, are the ones that are they have, okay, here this configuration, the cis and the trans configuration, okay, but that is not too important at this point. Let's see. Okay, so now we know metabolism, catabolism, anabolism, fatty acids, acetyl-CoA. I've heard of acetyl-CoA. I think that when we were talking about cellular respiration, an important molecule used in many biochemical reactions. It is the starting molecule of the citric acid cycle and the electron transport chain, the last two processes of cellular respiration to produce ATP. Now I remember that. So let's see, the acetyl-CoA, so acetyl coenzyme A. So the co means coenzyme. All right. So its main function is to combine the carbon atoms within the acetyl group to the citric acid cycle to be oxidized for energy production. Okay, yeah, I remember that after, in cellular respiration, we were able to use, the pyruvate was oxidized and converted into acetyl-CoA, and then that was used in the citric acid cycle. It went twice around the cycle for each pyruvate, and then it went into the electron transport chain to produce the ATP. All right. So it seems that pyruvate, there it goes, it forms, okay, and fatty acid metabolism. It seems that that is what we are going to be studying today. So let's go back to the lesson. So when cells run low of glycogen, they use lipids, fat, and even proteins to produce ATP. So here we are going to watch this video and learn about the triglycerides, the fatty acids, how they are broken down into acetyl-CoA, and how much ATP they produce. Okay, very, very good video. So after watching the video, I would continue and saying this video shows why fatty acids are very useful for energy production. Yes, because they produce a lot more ATP per molecule of carbon than glucose. Okay, glucose is more direct, I guess, but the fatty acids produce a lot more. During continuous low-intensity exercise, it is best for our cells to metabolize fats as much as possible without running out of glycogen. The problem is that it is easier for cells to use glycogen because it is stored closer to the cell. Okay, all right. When blood sugar is low, so the glucose is low, decreased insulin levels signal the adipocytes, cells that store lipids, okay, so that's the fat cells, to break down the triglycerides into free fatty acids. That is called lipolysis. Lipo for fat, lysis or lysis for breaking down, separating. So we saw glycolysis, lipolysis, okay. Release them into the bloodstream and transport them to the cells for oxidation. So the free fatty acids are released from the adipocytes into the blood, and then they are transported to the cell for oxidation. It says fatty acids need to be actively transported into the matrix of the mitochondria. Actively transported means that I have to use proteins and ATP to go through the membranes to bring the fatty acids inside the mitochondria. Okay, we study about all that. In the mitochondria, the process of beta oxidation breaks down the fatty acid chains into acetyl-CoA. Okay, this is the same acetyl-CoA that was result in oxidation of pyruvate process. Okay, so the process here of beta oxidation, let's look that up and see. Okay, let's see, beta oxidation in biochemistry and metabolism. Beta oxidation is the catabolic process, catabolic meaning to break down, by which fatty acid molecules, the long chain of carbon molecules, the fatty acids, are broken down in the mitochondria to generate acetyl-CoA, okay, which enters the citric acid cycle, and NADH and FADH2, which are coenzymes used in the electron transport chain. Okay, so this is once the fatty acid is broken down into acetyl-CoA, then the process is the same. The citric acid cycle and the electron transport chain is the same as in cellular respiration. Okay. It is named as such, beta oxidation, because the beta carbon of the fatty acid undergoes oxidation to the carbonic group. Okay, so that is why they are named that way. Okay, so here we see the overview, activation and membrane transport by fatty acids, of free fatty acids by binding to coenzyme A. So they bring the free fatty acids through the membrane. Oxidation of beta carbon to a carbonyl group. A carbonyl group, I believe, is a group of just two carbons, okay? The two carbons. Cleavage of two carbon segments resulting in acetyl-CoA. Okay, so yes, in the video, I remember that they explained that each one of the chains of carbon is broken into two carbons here. That is what they were talking about, and making acetyl-CoA. Oxidation of acetyl-CoA to carbon dioxide in the citric acid cycle. So the result of the citric acid cycle is this carbon dioxide. And then it goes through the electron transfer from electron carriers to the electron transfer chain in oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, so these two are synonyms. All right. All right, so now here they talk about the details of that. I'm not going to go into the details. All right, and they talk about the energy yield. This would be per acetyl-CoA. Okay, so for instance, the ATP yield of palmatite that has 16 carbons, okay, 16 carbons, so they divide it into two, and so it forms 8 acetyl-CoAs. They yield 14 each one of those, but one is used for energy probably. So the total yield is about 106 ATP. That is cool. Okay, so now I know what beta oxidation is. All right, so here we see beta oxidation. All right, so now I remember this process there of in the other video of cellular respiration. The acetyl-CoA is the end result of the pyruvate being broken down, okay? And in the case of the pyruvate being broken down, it releases 2 carbon dioxides because the pyruvate had 3, all right? And then it forms the acetyl-CoA. The acetyl-CoA can now continue the regular process of the citric acid cycle and electron transport chain. A fatty acid of 16 carbon chain can produce as much as 106 ATP. We saw that. Remember that for beta oxidation to occur, you still need oxygen to complete the electron transport chain. Okay, yes, that's right. So The electron transport chain is where we use the oxygen. So in order for beta oxidation to happen, we still need to breathe in, right? And you need low sugars to kick off the process, okay? However, if you completely run out of sugars, bad things happen. I wonder what happens if you run out of sugars all the way. Okay, so it seems that beta oxidation, to break down these fatty acids, you still need to breathe. Let's see, the next concept, when athletes consume all their storage of glycogen in the muscle and liver cells, they hit the wall. All right, I remember that, not only by seeing the video, but I have experienced that a couple of times during some long runs and cycling trips. Hitting the wall is not fun. Long distance athletes need to do the following: eat carbohydrates during exercise so they avoid running out of glycogen. Okay, yes? So when I run long distances, I need to eat about 100 to 150 calories an hour. Breathing a steady supply of oxygen to avoid going only into fermentation. Okay, so yes, you have to keep breathing in. Breathe out the carbon dioxide produced during respiration. Drink water to ensure the body can continue transporting substances and dissipating heat. We talk about that. And consume electrolytes, salt, potassium, calcium, magnesium. So we need to also eat these things to maintain the balance that many proteins in the cell need to function properly. For example, muscle contraction is dependent upon the presence of calcium, sodium, and potassium. Without sufficient levels of these key electrolytes, muscle weakness or severe muscle contractions may occur. So that's when you get cramps, okay? When you get a Charlie horse, all right, is because the muscle contracts because there's not enough calcium there. So you have to also do that. And train the body to trigger lipolysis to release stored fats and use them for energy instead of relying solely on glycogen. Okay, so that is an important trick, and you do that through training. Okay. Let's see, under very extreme conditions with low food intake, the body can even start breaking down its proteins to convert them to acetyl-CoA and use them for the production of energy and to provide the food necessary to maintain the brain cells. This is called the starvation response. Oh, wow. So that is when you are really not eating. In this stage, the body is literally consuming its own muscle tissue and the main building blocks of the body to maintain the minimum requirements of energy for survival. Okay, so let's see what starvation response. So, okay. Oh, that is when you really are starting to eat yourself. Let's see, in humans, a starvation mode is a state in which the body is responding to prolonged periods of low energy intake levels. During short periods of energy abstinence, the body will burn primarily free fatty acids from body fat stores. Okay, so first it uses, I guess, the glucose in the glycogen, then it uses the free fatty acids. After prolonged periods of the starvation, the body has depleted its body fat and begins to burn lean tissue and muscle as fuel source. Okay, so that is when not a good thing. Okay, I could continue reading on this. This seems very interesting. Let's see, after the exhaustion of glycogen reserves and for the next 2 to 3 days, fatty acids are the principal metabolic fuel. At first, the brain continues to consume glucose. After 2 or 3 days of fasting, the liver begins to synthesize ketone bodies from precursors obtained from fatty acid breakdown. Okay, and then the brain uses these ketone bodies as fuels. I don't know what they are. After several days of fasting, all cells in the body begin to break down proteins. This releases amino acids into the bloodstream, which can be converted into glucose by the liver. Since much of our muscle mass is protein, this phenomenon is responsible for the wasting away of muscle mass seen in starvation. Okay, so you don't want to get to that point. All right. Also, this is interesting. About 2 to 3 grams of protein has to be broken down to synthesize 1 gram of glucose. So this is about very inefficient use of protein. Okay. So about 20 to 30 grams of protein is broken down each day to make 10 grams of glucose to keep the brain alive. At this point, we are just concerned about keeping the brain alive. Okay, but it's very inefficient. I'm eating, consuming 2 to 3 times the muscle to just maintain the brain alive for a day. Okay. Ugh. Not very healthy place. And then here it goes into an example of the Terra Nova expedition. I'm going to let you study about this, but this was an example where, the party here in the Scott expedition, they literally starved to death. This was under very extreme conditions. Okay. So the next concept, metabolic pathways are sequences of chemical reactions that occur in the cell to synthesize different molecules. In the last few lessons, we have learned about different processes for the cell to obtain energy. We have studied cellular respiration, I remember that, and the 4 steps of cellular respiration. We studied fermentation, how it is related to glycolysis, and thus lactic acid fermentation and alcohol fermentation. Fatty acid metabolism, we just learned that about beta oxidation and how it also feeds the citric acid cycle. Each one of these processes is called a metabolic pathway. Okay. So let's see the article here for metabolic pathway. So it's a series of chemical reactions occurring in the cell. All right. So there are lots of different, and here it talks again back about glycolysis, and it has a map of that. I have that map here on the lesson. Remember when we studied the process of protein synthesis and we learned that the building blocks of proteins are 22 amino acids? Yeah, I remember that. Most of these amino acids need to be synthesized in the cell. Okay, the chemical reactions to synthesize each one of those amino acids is a metabolic pathway. There are thousands of metabolic pathways that different organisms perform. Okay, so every chemical, everything that is produced in the body is one of these metabolic pathways. And the image below shows a few of the major metabolic pathways. Okay, so let's see what we see here. All right. Okay, we see here some pathways to produce. Okay. Oh, here it went to the image. That's okay. So here we see some pathways that produce AMP. I remember the adenosine monophosphate, ATP, recognize adenosine. These are the nucleotides. Okay. All right. Vitamin C. All right. So there's a pathway to produce vitamin C. There's a pathway to produce sucrose and cellulose and sucrose metabolism. another one to produce glycogen and amylose. Amylose is the starch and glycogen metabolism. So these are pathways that from glucose they produce these other things. And then, oh, okay, here I see the anaerobic sugar respiration. That's the process. Here you see the pyruvate, acetyl-CoA, and then the citric acid cycle. So this is the regular sugar respiration that we studied, a cellular respiration. Yeah, but it starts with sugar. So that an anaerobic sugar respiration from the pyruvate, it goes into lactate or ethanol, that is the lactic acid fermentation, and alcoholic fermentation. So this is the pathway of fermentation that we studied. Let's see what else can we find. Okay, oh, fatty acid metabolism. So this must be the beta oxidation pathway that starts here from fats, the free fatty acids, and then they go into acetyl-CoA and the citric acid cycle. So that's what we studied today. Excellent. So there are lots of different pathways. I wish we could have time to study everything here, but these are just the main concepts that we have seen today. Excellent. Okay. Can you identify the pathways we have studied in this image? Yes, we saw the cellular respiration pathway, we saw the fermentation pathway, and the fatty acid metabolism pathway. Okay, good deal. All right. I will let you study also the gospel principles and be prepared to discuss those in the lesson. Okay? So I hope that this gives you then an idea of how to study and how to prepare for the lesson. We saw how I use the materials in the lesson, follow the links, watch the videos. We didn't watch the videos, but you would watch the videos and study that. But you see how the lesson materials really build up on things that we have previously learned and previously studied, and that gives you an opportunity to synthesize, to build up. This is a catabolic process. No, it's an anabolic process of knowledge. Okay, anabolic process of knowledge going up. All right. For preparing for the lesson. I went through this kind of fast, but it took about 30-35 minutes. I imagine that watching the videos and thinking things a little bit more carefully, inspecting things in more detail, it would take probably about an hour and 15 minutes for you to prepare for the lesson. But with this type of preparation, after you've done this, you will be more than ready to volunteer to teach part of the lesson in class without any problem. Okay? I hope that this is a helpful example. Thank you very much and see you in class.